In 1970, the Stones released their live album Get Your Yayas Out. And this is actually the drummer Charlie Watts on the cover. He looks quite happy, doesn't he? And it's not just one of the best Stones live albums, it's arguably one of the best live albums ever. The virtuoso playing of Mick Taylor especially stands out, but sometimes overlooked is Keith Richards. Now we know the man wrote some fantastic riffs and some brilliant songs for that matter, but he's also one hell of a guitarist. One of the reasons why this is such a great guitar solo is the way Keith starts the solo. What would most people do when they start a solo? Something like this. But what does Keith do? He starts like this. What an amazing difference! And then he takes a huge pause even. And then he repeats the sentence. A little bit different. Ends on the fifth, building some tension. And then he starts. And that works! Imagine if you would just skip that whole beginning and immediately start with... It wouldn't have been half as good. It's because of that mellow, very low-key beginning that it works. Now, another thing which is great about Keith Richards' guitar playing is... Well, I'm not going to say it, I'm just going to show you. Many people do this. Now let's compare that to what Keith Richards is playing. Now that certainly sounds better, does it? But the question is, why? What's the difference? Well, the thing is, if you take Keith Richards' solo and forget about the melody that he's playing, completely ignore the melody and just play the bare rhythm, you get something like this. So the rhythm of the solo stands on its own even without the melody. Now if you compare that to the rhythm I was playing in the first example, that would be something like this. Not quite as interesting. And why wasn't it as interesting? Well, because the rhythm almost did not have any variation, and that's what Keith is doing so well in this solo. A good guitar solo is not just about playing a great melody, you also have to play great rhythm. Now, a great influence on Keith's playing also is Chuck Berry.
You want to get it right? Let's get it right. Okay.
And when you think of Keith Richards, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's a small miracle the man is still alive, isn't it? And when you talk about sex, drugs and rock and roll, this man used to be the embodiment of all that. I say used to be because I think he's sobered up by now a little bit, because otherwise the man wouldn't be around. Now, more impressive than that is his songwriting ability. Take a song like Angie. The credits say it's a Jagger and Richards song, but in fact it was Keith who wrote the whole thing by himself. Now what's interesting is the way that Keith is playing this intro. In today's age, there's a huge emphasis on keeping a steady tempo, playing in the pocket, it's called. And that's why many people practice with a metronome, which is very good. But there's also a downside. Your job is not to become a human machine, a human metronome. You're gonna sound very dull, and especially if you're gonna play the Stones, and you're too much focused on keeping the beat, it sounds like this. That was more or less in the pocket, and it was incredibly shite. I live in Ireland, we say shite. What you want to do is, I'm pretty sure that Keith Richards didn't play this intro with a click track or anything. It's all about the feel, and who cares if you're a little bit increasing or decreasing the tempo. I'm much more focused on dynamics. And I was actually increasing a little bit here and there and actually slowing down somewhat. Not consciously. I'm not like, oh, I'm gonna slow down here. No, it's something that happens naturally. Look at it this way. Thank God the drummer of Led Zeppelin didn't play with a metronome. It's always tough to say, what is your favorite album, isn't it? And when it comes to the Stones, I do like this one because of all the strange and weird instruments that Brian Jones is playing. But on the other hand, this one, with songs like Gimme Shelter, Midnight Rambler and You Can't Always Get What You Want, well, it doesn't get any better than that, does it? Now, whatever album you prefer, there's always a good riff on there somewhere, because creating badass riffs is what Keith does best. One of the more obscure riffs by the Stones, Slave, from the album Tattoo You. Now the good thing again is, it's so incredibly simple. It only has 4 chords. When he writes a riff, more or less, it's not too complex. He wouldn't do something like this. Sure, that sounds great and fancy and everything, but that would probably only appeal to a very small audience of die-hard guitarists. But instead something like this. Now that's much easier to understand and also much easier to play, and therefore would appeal to a much larger audience. And if there's one thing about Keith Richards playing, it always sounds very laid back, and you can also tell it the way he's looking when he's playing. He has that kind of a certain attitude like, I don't give a f***. That's another thing he does, by the way. Eh? You can play a chord like this. Keith Richards would play it like this. And it does somehow sound different. Now, another great riff, obviously, is Gimme Shelter. But if you want to play that on a regular tuned guitar, it's quite difficult. What you want to do is tune both the A and the top E string one whole step down. There we are. And now it's simply a matter of pressing down your index finger. And again, this is so simple. Then he just adds a bit of embellishments, and there we are. So incredibly simple and such a beautiful mood. It even sounds good on piano.